Welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast, which aims to provide you with language, tools, and guidance in your journey towards personal and relational wholeness. We'll discuss topics ranging from psychology, spirituality, tantra, leadership, sexuality, polyamory, and more. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for insightful interviews with thought leaders, practitioners, and experts who have a thing or two to share about living an integrated and meaning-making life. Whether you're looking to deepen your connection with your interior world, overcome challenges in your relationships, or expand your psychosomatic horizons with fresh perspectives and paradigms, the Inner Work Community Podcast offers a safe yet challenging space for dialogue and introspection. This is all a gift, so let's go enjoy it together. Well, welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Simmons, and I have the honor, pleasure, privilege of having Kevin Martin join us today to talk about sexuality, non-monogamy, and shadow work. And if you're just listening to this, you can watch on YouTube. But if you're just listening, I want you to know that Kevin and I are wearing the same exact shirt that reads monogamy in this economy, and just felt appropriate, felt playful, because this is inherently a very taboo, kind of tense topic most places, but we can play with it. We can have fun with it. We can enjoy the conversation. So I've got my hat on backwards. I got my t-shirt on, and I've got some good friends listening in today. So, again, my name is Michael. I specialize in shadow work and have done an immense amount of research and degrees in the world of Christianity ministry. And now I help people make sense of their own spirituality, and in some cases leave those kinds of environments, in other cases understand how to exist within them. I live here in Portland, Oregon. I'm originally from Tennessee. And so when I get going, sometimes a Southern accent will just manifest itself. But just know I am a safe person. So yeah, Kevin, will you introduce yourself before we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. And just first off, thank you for having me. Michael and I've been talking these past few days leading up to this, and we've both just been so giddy. Like you used that word, and that was like the perfect word just to describe like this time. I'm just so thankful for you, for the work that you do, for the space that you create, and just for the community that you build. So thank you for doing that first off, and then for inviting me in. But yeah, my name is Kevin Martin. I currently live in Hawaii. I'm originally from Ohio. I grew up on a small farm in a town called Pemberville, Ohio. The farm has been the family for like 5 generations. It's just kind of our livelihood. It's everything that we've known. I grew up Lutheran very strongly in the Lutheran Church. I was confirmed, went through catechism, all the good stuff over the years. As I was in preschool, I realized that I liked boys and that there was this really cute boy in my class. And then the older that I got, and the more aware I became of my environment, I realized that that was not allowed and it wasn't okay. And so I started to really internally wrestle. With that wrestling over time came counseling and therapy, and I realized just how life-saving that was. And so I wanted to enter into that space to help do the same for other people. And so now I have a coaching practice called SafeHaus Wellness Services, where we work with folks all over the world, primarily within the queer community, but we work with anybody and everybody, and on all different topics, particularly though within the realms of sexuality and consensual non-monogamy. So I'm just so excited for this conversation, and it'll be amazing.
Yeah. Kevin, thanks for being here and accepting the invitation. This is a conversation I feel like, for whatever reason, it just comes at a good time. I mean, the conversations around non-monogamy and polyamory have really ballooned and centralized, if you will, in discussion forums, conversations, families. And yet there's still not a lot of organic ways to connect around this, right? Like there just aren't. There are formal ways. You can go to read books, you can listen to a podcast, or they're very isolated, like individualistic. So this is one of the values I had was, let's have this conversation and let's have it in a way that like people can listen in and dialogue a little bit about it. So, but before we get into the whole non-monogamy of it all, can you talk a little bit about why is sexuality important? Like, why is it important for our overall well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, right off the bat, it's just already part of who we are. It's part of what it means to be human. I think of it as like a piece of a pie where it is one slice of that pie. It's not the whole entire pie. I mean, there's so much more to life, but it is an integral piece that still makes up that entire puzzle. And how do we know that? We know that because it's connected to our body, and our body is what we come here onto this planet with. It's a necessary component for connection. And yes, we have connection is a massive word, and there are multiple layers of what that can look like. But sexuality is one of those components that allows us to connect with other people. And so when I think of sexuality, like that's such a big word, and language, I'm a huge language person. Like language can be super helpful a lot of the times. It can also be quite limiting at different points as well. And I think sometimes like we can get kind of tripped up on just the word sexuality. And so sometimes it can be helpful to find like a replacement word for that. And so I think a really good one is kind of intimacy, where like what does it mean to be intimate with somebody? Again, like that can have a number of layers and components to that, but intimacy is all about closeness, and we can be emotionally close, we can be physically close, we can be sexually close, but it's honing in on that kind of energy that's shared between beings. And so when I think of sexuality, that's what I think of like utilizing our body and our attraction to create this energy that we can pass back and forth and can support one another with.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing forward, I think energy is a huge part of this because um, I hesitate to go all the way back to Freud, but, Freud would say, we would talk about libido. And oftentimes the way that we refer to libido in popular culture is the way that Freud would refer to it, which is very limited to sexual energy. I would say most people, who study sexuality would take more of a Jungian approach, which is that libido actually is about life energy. It's the whole of the pie. It's not just that one slice. And the problem comes though when life energy is allowed to flow, except, it goes back to the creation myth in the Hebrew text. You can eat of everything in the garden except, this one fruit. And by the way, that's just really more of like a modern Christian interpretation of that. But the reality is, we've been, I would say, probably everyone on this call, I can't speak for everyone, I guess, but if you're listening, you likely have been impacted by Christianity at some level, and the rules and regulations and morality that you inherit by existing in the Western world. And sexuality is a massive part of the collective shadow. That means that it's hidden from not just in certain individual people, it's hidden from us. It's like an atmospheric neglect of the whole energy around sexuality. And so when we try to stifle libido or life energy, in the realm of sexuality, it can come out sideways, and it can do things like pull us into this deep depression. We're like, okay, well, if you try to stifle energy, if you try to clog a pipe in your house, that thing will either just keep leaking, or it will explode, right? And a depression, the leaking is kind of like being depressed. It just kind of like life energy just kind of flows out of you. It doesn't really do anything. Or it can get so pent up, so intense underneath the surface that it then explodes and does damage to people, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that that happens. So this is, I think, a really essential topic because it has to do with, I mean, it results in trauma ultimately. Like when sexuality is not embraced in ways that are conscious, it will result in people getting hurt, yourself included, but certainly other people as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I'm grateful to work with just so many clients in this realm and in this space. And it's really when we start to like really break it down, it gets to be really interesting to sometimes see because like when we look at it at its kind of face value, like there really isn't much more that's as natural as sexuality. Like it it's just what we are like born into this planet with. Uh and it's like exactly like kind of like what you said of like it's equivalent to us saying everything else in life is okay for us to do, but not to look at this one very very critical piece. It'd almost be like, what if we just replace that with eating, where what if that was the thing that we weren't allowed to take a look at. How integral that is for survival, but how shamed that be could become. And when we really start like diving in even further, we can really land on the simplicity of it, but the power that it holds, where when we start to give ourselves that own permission just to be exactly human as we are, it's just a respect of ourselves, where we're just recognizing the energy that we naturally have and just allowing that to be. Like we're neither neglecting it nor are we pushing it. Like to use that plumbing analogy, like we're just opening up that pipe, and if there's something that needs to flow through it, we'll let it flow through. But if there's nothing there, we're not going to push anything or try to shove it to make something happen. um and so like when I like yeah, just thinking of sexuality, like I just think of like the words like mindfulness really come into play, but respect and like reflection, like reflecting our own recognition of the energy that we have and just allowing that energy to be, neither stifling it nor trying to stimulate something that isn't natural, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say, Kevin, like what's a very practical way that you maybe personally, but you've seen like sexuality is you just open up the pipe, like it's just experienced, right? Like, cause I imagine people listening hear the word sexuality and it goes to this extreme, especially in the context we're talking about polyamory. The assumptions around that are it's like you're just having sex with anyone and everyone at everywhere you go. You know what I mean? Like that's because of how repressed sexuality is culturally. So that we can only imagine an extreme. But um for just like an average experience of sexual energy, what can that look like on just like a normal Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday? It's Wednesday today. What does it look like on just a normal Wednesday afternoon living your life?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think of it as like I think of sneezing like kind of like as an example. Like if you need to sneeze, then sneeze. Like don't hold it in. Like if you hold it in, you're going to burst a blood vessel or something. Like just let it out. And so like we can kind of take that same kind of playful and fun approach with our sexuality, where we just we just simply check in. And that checking in is just asking, like, what is my sexual energy at right now? But like if we start, like if we recognize like, hey, I'm feeling pretty horny in this moment, then okay, that's perfect. That's where you are as of this point in time. If nothing is there, perfect. That's totally okay too. Like just that checking in is just a reflection of noticing, embodying the energy that we are finding. One of my favorite kind of practices I love to give clients is just to like create like a mindful half hour for yourself where, literally carve this into your schedule. Block out your calendar, turn off your phone, turn off your computer, like let go of any connection to like the outside world and just place yourself in a private space with your own self for 30 minutes and just exist. Like just take your clothes off and just sit there, lay there. Just notice, first off, if this is the first time we're doing it, we'll notice how uncomfortable we'll feel. But then after we kind of get used to that, just allow whatever is there to be there. Something that can be really fun to kind of add into that is like a bit of like sensual touch where it's just, just touching, embracing your body, just noticing how that feels. Like as you rub your hand down your arm, like notice that sensation of like that connection that you feel with your own body. And so in that type of a way, again, like we're not necessarily like stimulating anything, but we're not holding back from any energy that gets created as well. And so if that leads to any sexual experience with yourself, allow that to be. Give yourself that own space, that own permission for your body to do what your body needs to do. It like that exercise, not only when we do it once, but when we do it kind of like as a practice, uh starts to really begin to rewire some of the messaging that we have, where we over time we want to then start arriving at this place of pleasure is okay, pleasure is allowed, pleasure is safe. I can create safe, pleasurable experiences for myself. I have that autonomy to do so. And I know what that feels like, so I can ask that for myself. I can advocate for that for myself when I need it. And I can also do the same for other people. I can respect that and reflect that with them as well.
Oh, so good. Yeah, like that's such I mean, what you just gave is it's a real accessible practice. And yet I would imagine, I mean, I'm noticing my own reactions because uh though that's something I would do, I don't know that I've ever heard someone suggest it in the context of other people listening to that. So, I think that I mean that just I'm noticing my own reactions because it's the reactions. This is where maybe we get into a little bit of the whole idea of shadow work and shadow. It's like, okay, if you can notice your reactions not only to sexuality as a concept or how other people talk about it, but notice your reactions to your own, right? Like noticing your reactions to the idea or the imaginal scenario of you masturbating or you simply just laying back naked and allowing yourself to be in that space. You're not even letting yourself be seen. You might not be looking at yourself, but you're exposing yourself to the environment around you, even in a solitude kind of space. That can still kick up a lot, but it can be really beneficial. And so it's less about not doing that. In fact, that's never going to work. Never going to not be able to not feel something. What you do is you feel it and you feel the discomfort. You listen to the messages, right? Because as you start to feel your body, engage your body, let your body feel the air. I mean, that's one thing when you're naked, just alone in your room, is your skin will feel air in a way that it doesn't usually. And that in of itself can bring about shame, right? That can kick up some stuff. But noticing the messages that come, that you're like, where is that coming from? It's like this internalized message that I shouldn't be doing this, that I can't do this. And it's like, who told you? It's funny. It's so ironic to me in the whole world of spirituality that like we will listen to these messages of critique and shame and um, of like almost condescension that happen inside of us. And we're commonly taught that that must be the voice of God. We're commonly taught that that's the voice of some sort of divine good. That divine good would say, can we use the word convict in the whole Christian one? Like, oh, there's a conviction. It's just so ironic to me because I'm like, okay, fair enough. If you want to believe that, great. But just so you know, you also told me that that kind of voice is the voice of Satan. Okay,
Mhm.
so fair enough if you want to think that that's God. But can someone give me a bar chart to distinguish between the voice of the divine good and the divine evil? Because they sound an awful lot alike, especially around sexuality. And I mean, let's be honest, in the end, what we're actually dealing with are internalized messages that have come from our environment that uh, may or may not have had good intent, right? So, shadow work around sexuality is essentially about noticing your reactions, noticing the messages, uh, um, and getting to know them, right? Instead of pushing them away or trying to like, oh, I don't have to think like that. I don't have to go there. No, let it kind of flood in. And I think that's actually really where support can be helpful because now you can bring that into a supportive environment. Shameless plug for Kevin's practice and for mine, but you can bring that into an environment where it can be heard, where you can be heard, where that message can be heard. And it's like, oh, but now you're also hearing it from outside yourself. And that's how it gets integrated. That's how that shadowed message finds its home, its right place, and it just takes consistent relationship though. It's like any friendship. Okay, yeah, like if you go try the practice that Kevin suggested just now, and you try to go do that and you have a terrible experience the first time, well, yeah, it makes sense, especially to the degree if you're disconnected from your body, your sexuality. But if you just keep showing up, there's a relational component to this that just takes time. Um, and and I can definitely say, like for myself, um, uh, that time has been so well invested that I feel like I've not arrived, and yet I feel like I can relate to my body in ways that I could not have imagined even 2, 3 years ago. Yeah. So, Kevin, like I'm maybe we get into the non-monogamous conversation here. Um, so when typical listener would hear the words non-monogamy or polyamory, um, first words that come up will probably be have something to do with sex, which is ironic because if you said the word like monogamy, I don't know. No one says monogamy, by the way, because no one can see it. It's like the air. It's like you just breathe it. It's just everywhere. No one questions the air. No one questions monogamy. I think I told Kevin before our show started that I don't think I ever said the word monogamy until I started navigating non-monogamy, because it was only in contrast to non-monogamy that monogamy existed. Um, so yeah, talk a little bit about this because you experience this day in, day out around conversation around sexuality and non-monogamy, polyamory. I don't even know what question to ask, but find the trailhead and walk us down it.
Yeah, totally, totally, totally. Yeah, and real quick, I just want to say too, thank you for bringing up like the shadow piece. Like, as it might be interesting going back and watching this video because as I was saying that last piece, kind of giving that practice on that mindfulness component, I completely dissociated. I wasn't here. I was thinking about somebody last year who really just ridiculed me for the type of work that I do, and I was thinking like if this person heard that, what they would be saying to me, what messages would be coming. And then I was like, oh, what if my mom hears this? What if my grandma hears it? What if my sister hears it? Well, there goes those relationships. And like I have been doing this personally for 7, 8 years at least. My relationship with my sexuality was so bad to the point that like anytime I would try to experience anything sexual, whether it was with my own self or with anybody else, like I would tremor and I would have like these like physical like body shakes. It got so bad at one point that it shook the whole house and pictures were like falling off the wall. And so I've been doing this work a long time, and then now I do this work with clients, but it still happens. And I want to share that because like this points back to the relational piece where like we are in relationship with our own self at all points in time. And a beautiful component of honoring our sexuality is respecting our own relationship with ourself and kind of giving it that space, that voice. That for so long, somebody or another has told us that that's not okay, that that's not allowed. Um, but when we start to see that message, that we have that message of this is bad, this is wrong, I'm not okay, this isn't what we do. We then, first notice that that's there, and then we ask like, who is this coming from? Where is this coming from? But then also, is this something that I want to digest now? Is this something that I want to bring into my space now? And most of the time it's no, like that's not helping us anymore. But that doesn't mean that it's not still impacting us. But each time that we give ourselves this permission and this space, like we're actively kind of chipping away at those old messages. But it's a practice, it's a process, it's a relationship. And I don't want to paint the expectation that like, we'll do this once, this or any other, kind of exercise, and that everything will be okay. We'll be a completely different person. No, I think all of us are going to continue to carry some sexual shame throughout the rest of our life, because we are still in this society that bombards us with those messages all day long. So we need to actively work against them. But the cool thing about that is that then allows us to turn inward and really, really honor that own relationship with ourself, where it's like, okay, these messages are going to come my way, but how can I have this force field around me that I get to protect what I know to be true, and allow everything else to kind of bounce off that's no longer beneficial or helpful. So I just wanted to share that real quick. But yeah, I think like the bridge from sexuality to consensual non-monogamy is like the slightest little hop. Like they're like one and the same almost, especially when we start to bring in, a queer component. But the Michael and I were talking about this earlier, and I think like the really kind of cool thing about consensual non-monogamy is that we're all already doing it, and we have been since like day one. When we hear that word and that phrase, like again, that's a big word. It carries a lot of weight. It carries a lot of concern, probably judgment, shame, depending on where we come from and how we've experienced it before. But just breaking down that word and that definition of consensual non-monogamy, it just means to be in relationship with more than one thing at the same time. And so we are all in relationship with every single thing in this planet. Like when we think of like it from an energetic component, like I have a relationship to my water bottle. Like there is an energy that's shared between this, with my coffee cup, with my dog, with my partner, with my friends, with the grocery store clerk. Like we all have this way of relating that is shared between us, and we're all doing it simultaneously all day long. And of course, the depth and the intimacy of that relationship is going to vary from one dynamic to the next. But when we can look at it from that perspective, it's no longer scary, and it becomes something that we can start to work with as opposed to working against. You know, when we think of consensual non-monogamy, that's a huge like umbrella term. Like that is the umbrella. And then underneath it, we have these different areas. So we have like open relationships, polyamory, swinging. We have relationship anarchy, solo polyamory. There's a whole bunch, and there's even more beyond the ones that are there. But just to kind of paint that linguistic definition, that's kind of the world that we're talking about. But when we often talk about it, we often do think about it relationally, intimately, sexually. But I do think it's helpful to kind of expand that out a little bit more, just to see that this concept of relating to multiple things at the same time exists everywhere.
Yeah. This is like my favorite thing to talk about because, if someone says, "Oh, I'm not polyamorous, I'm not, non-monogamous," the reality is like, yeah, we're surrounded by people, places, things. Let's just call them nouns that we're in relationship with, that other people are also in relationship with, right? I'm like I said, I'm from Tennessee. I don't really feel at home in Tennessee, but the one thing that feels like home as it relates to Tennessee is the University of Tennessee sports teams, basketball and football in particular. And my co-parent will tell you, if we've ever been out in public and I see someone wearing University of Tennessee paraphernalia, I will literally run and meet them, regardless of how socially inappropriate it is. And one time I ran across a restaurant. I saw a woman sitting at a bar and she was wearing University of Tennessee colors. Honestly, I don't think I knew if it was. It just looked like the actual Pantone color of orange. And so I went up to her and said, "Are you from Tennessee?" And she was like, "Actually, no, I got this from a thrift store." So it was not a good connection. But that, I was like, what I love, one of the biggest loves I have living in Portland, Oregon, is when someone else loves the University of Tennessee. And we both have this moment of, "Oh, you love them too." And what connects us is our mutual love for the University of Tennessee. Now, that might be like kind of like a silly example. And yet, if you're a part of a family where there's more than one other person, and there's love going a couple different directions, that is a multiple love, right? Polyamory, multiple love. It is certainly not a monogamous kind of experience. It's closer to a non-monogamous, because if you're a parent, you're going to have a love for a child that is different than your love for your partner, or partners. I mean, that love is going to have, it's abundant. It tends to have this way of just being able to go wherever. It's not limited to one person. But I'll take it a step further and say that the Orthodox Christian image of God is not monogamous. The Orthodox image of God is inherently polyamorous, right? I mean, and the more someone might want to dig their heels in and say, "Well, that can't be true." It's like, well, so what church do you go to? Okay, how many members are there in your church? One? Oh, there's more than one. Oh, so there's a lot of people who all love God. And let me ask you one more question. Does God love everyone in that church? Oh, interesting. See, that image is inherently not just one to one. And if we want to take it to the Rublev's image of the Trinity, right? The classic icon, it's three individuals sitting around a table with space for a fourth, indicating that there is room for more at the table. Kevin mentioned a number of the identifiers under the umbrella of non-monogamy. One of those is actually called kitchen table polyamory, which is a way of talking about a polyamorous dynamic where all of the people involved are cool with being around each other, right? They like, and in some cases, at least have an amicable relationship. So that would be a better image of how Orthodox Christianity has thought about the image of God, right? Three persons in one, right? Three persons, one love, right? There is this movement of love that's just kind of always generative and always including. That is essentially what we're dealing with. And the image of God that is more monotheistic or more monogamy is several hundred years younger. It's developed more so out of the economic and industrial evolutions of the Roman Empire, and how Christianity essentially became kind of the guiding or undergirding theological system that held the empire together. And so monogamy, the whole idea of like, it was one man and one woman, right? Marriage is between one man and one woman. We've heard this for decades in the United States in the political rhetoric. That idea is actually not anything really related to Jesus. It's actually very much an empire kind of consolidating and organizing principle that definitely makes things smoother when it comes to inheritance, or makes things smoother when it comes to, well, whose kid is that? It definitely smooths out the social framework. And yet what it also does is it really confines and constrains and blocks that libido, that life energy, when it's trying to simply flow, when it's trying simply to exist. It has a way of just locking it down. By the way, I'll make this note. If you've not read the book, Polysecure, I'm holding it up if you're watching the video, Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy. It's a great book because it brings the whole conversation around non-monogamy and polyamory in with the conversation around attachment theory, being anxiously attached or avoidantly attached. But it also, if I'm not mistaken, has a chart that kind of shows exactly, you can Google search this too, but talks about the umbrella, right, of non-monogamy, and then all the different ways that non-monogamy can be engaged and experienced. And I think those can be very orienting. It's not about finding the label that fits you. It's about finding the direction that puts you towards yourself. Right? It's never about, what's the label I need to wear? No, it's the same way we would treat a compass or directions on a map. It's like, you're not going to identify with the North unless you're, what's the show, The North? I'm thinking Vikings or something. Like, you're not going to identify with a direction. No, direction orients you. A direction puts you going in the direction you're trying to go. So these labels and these terminologies are really only helpful in that they pull you towards yourself, help you to understand yourself better. And the beautiful thing is that directions change, right? So a certain direction may orient you for a time, and then you get to this point of like, oh, actually it's this way. I've known many people, and I've experienced this in my own family, my create your own adventure family that I have, which is, it evolves. Like you have this label that very clearly identifies who you are, what your relationship is, and then that evolves. And that is painful. And it is just the way of things, because directions change. If we're trying to get where we're going and thinking it's going to be linear and a straight path, or there's going to be some sort of point of arrival, it's just not real. It's actually so much more relational than that. And so it's really about the relationship deepening, the relationship evolving, and giving space and bandwidth for that to just happen organically.
Oh, Michael, that's so good. Yeah, when I think of consensual non-monogamy, I I think there are few, if any, sexuality might be the only other one, but just because they're so inherently tied. But like, I don't think there's much more, maybe spirituality, that requires us to do some deep work within ourselves, because it just naturally rises everything that we've ever been afraid of or insecure of or nervous about up to the surface. And I think this is why, like, for so many of us, like, it's such a scary topic, is because it makes us question change. It makes us question the things that we have found security in or safety in. Like the brain, the way the I'm a huge brain fan, and like the way that it works, what it loves, what it absolutely craves is organization. The brain is a machine, and its one and only job is just to keep us alive. It's not to make us happy, it's not to make us feel good, it's not to bring great things our way. It's just to keep going. Like that's the only thing that it's made for. And so it's a machine, and it's an incredibly powerful machine that we haven't even tapped into like the fullness of it. But it can also get in its own way sometimes, and sometimes like the way that it does that is through organization. Where this is why as humans we love routine, we love systems, we love being able to categorize things, make sense of things, because it's clear, it's understandable. It gives us a way of directing, of orientation, and at the same time, it can also become a limitation. It can become a piece that we find potentially too much security in, that keeps us stuck, or keeps us in one place. So a lot of people then start to kind of poke back at that and be like, well, if I'm comfortable and if I'm safe here, do I need to change it? No, if that's fine for you, go ahead. But there's if you are somebody who is curious or open to exploring new perspectives, new ideas, new ways of relating. New isn't the correct term. Let's say
It's like it's new to the kind of uh,
the norm.
previous
Right?
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Then like there's a whole world that this opens up, because when we start to think of like what would it look like for me to call somebody my partner, but then they also have a partner of their own. um what that brings up automatically is that fear of safety, that fear of relational security, um that fear of attachment, of detachment, of our own love, our own loneliness. It we have no choice but to face those things, and that's where so much beauty can happen, is in that really damn uncomfortable process of allowing ourselves to step into that space to explore those really uncomfortable things. Because when we do that, ultimately what we'll always find time and time again is that leads us to deeper connection each and every single time.
Yes, I love this. Okay, so the last kind of thing, section I'd love for us to engage is just what can someone who is just very secure in their monogamous orientation, their monogamous relationship, what could someone like that learn from engaging a non-monogamy just in terms of like an academic sense, or like just engaging it from I'm going to read a book on it and see what's there just to learn, the terminology, the different perspectives. What is something that you would say a securely monogamous person would learn from that? And let me make this one statement. Monogamy is also not inherently bad, right? In this episode, we're kind of giving non-monogamy the spotlight. Monogamy has it. Once you leave this podcast, you can just go wherever, and it will have its space everywhere else. Monogamy is not bad. Monogamy can be non-consensual, and polyamory can be highly consensual, and vice versa. It's really it really is how it's navigated and how consciously it is engaged, right? So, okay, with that caveat, if you're monogamous and listening, you are not a second-rate citizen. um, it's just that non-monogamy doesn't get talked about a lot. But what can someone who's monogamous learn about their own relationship, their own attachment, their own inner world from engaging the topic of non-monogamy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for this question. This question is so beautiful. And what I automatically think of is the ability to learn how to be mindful within our relationships and to learn how to be dynamic and conscious about them. Where when when the default is kind of when the default is monogamy, um, that kind of becomes very automatic. It's socially automatic, but then even in the terms of the container that we build within our partnership with one other person, it we typically have a set list of what that includes. The American dream comes to mind, like buying a house, getting married, stuff like that, living together. Those are kind of components that we feel are just the default. And so we might not give ourselves time to even think of like, well, let me step one step back and ask just for myself, like, do I even want this? Like, do I even want these things? Um, if you do, amazing. That's great. Perfect. I love that for you. If you don't, amazing. That's great too. Like, there's no right or wrong here. This is your life. Do what you want. But like, just that ability to ask a question and to check in. Like, I know I've used that phrase a lot, but like when we hear that phrase of checking in, that's what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is just all about being present. It's just being right here, right now. This is the only time that we have. Uh, and like we're not anywhere else. And so when we gift ourselves with that space to check in with our relationship, to check in with ourselves within that relationship of, how am I feeling here? Like I know when I ran into Aunt Susie, over the holidays and she was like, how's your relationship going? Like, oh, it's good. You know, let me ask like, oh, is it actually good? Like, am I actually happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I experiencing joy that I want, that I would like? Am I loving my partner the way that I will ideally want to love my partner? Um, like we just want to non-judgmentally check in with ourselves and see what comes up there. Um, the a lot of us don't do this because we're afraid of what we'll find, because we know what's kind of hidden behind that door, and that's scary and it's terrifying, and it absolutely is. uh when I asked myself this question, this led to my divorce a few years later, like, and I knew that, and that's why I wouldn't ask that question. But when we give ourselves that space to check in, that's not only how we meet the moment, but that's how we meet our partner where they are. That's how we meet ourselves where we are. And that's ultimately how we love each other best. And that's why we get into a relationship in the first place, is to love other people, which is also that reflection of loving us, which is cheesy cliche, I know, but like it's true. um, and so like what I hope people in monogamous relationships or monogamous orientations can take away from a non-monogamous experience is, yeah, I know it's scary and I know it's nerve-wracking and it's hard, but check in with yourself, with your partner, not not on a surface level check in, but on a deep level. Like go ask those tough questions for each other, and just explore what's there, stay dynamic with it, know that you are a dynamic person, your partner's a dynamic person, and so because of that, the natural equation between the two of you is always flowing and evolving too. It's different from the first day that you met, it's different from where you've gotten married, if you did. And so check in where things are now, and know that again, the very best way that we can love another person is to reflect where they are and where their needs are at this point in time, knowing that again, they're going to continue to change. And that's what I think is so cool with non-monogamy, is that it is like, it just forces us to be in that headspace of like, okay, how are you doing today? What are you needing today? How can we, what does that look like for meeting this moment? But when we do that, that level of depth and vulnerability just leads to that depth of connection that we're ultimately wanting for everybody involved.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, the word liberation is kind of the primary word that comes up. Like, what is it that, having lived monogamously, and I'll be candid, where I'm at now is this, like, I think that I'm at least more aligned with polyamory than I am with monogamy. Doesn't mean I don't want secure attachment with maybe a one person, but I don't want what I did unconsciously before. But the one big thing I think that I've learned is that I was really bound. There was a lot of ways energy was trying to flow that were just completely not on the table, until they were brought up and they were talked about. And when they got brought up and got talked about, it also eventually led to my own divorce. Like you were saying, I mean, it doesn't always happen, but in mine and Kevin's case, perhaps it's 100% of the time. You know what I mean? Like, the reality is that sometimes that, because like, I look back at my relationship with my co-parent and say, our divorce was actually being more aligned with our original vows to each other, to like actually be there to support each other wherever, whatever, every foot of altitude, I think, is what we said in our vows. It's like, well, like, for me to actually be faithful to that vow, it meant that we needed to find a path forward towards wholeness for ourselves individually. So liberation's a big one. And so that's the question, right? Like, where are you free? Where in your relationship do you feel freedom? And that question may immediately come with, well, marriage isn't about being free, or, having a partner is not about being free. It's about commitment. It's about suffering. If you're not suffering, you're not doing it right. Well, it's like, okay, well, like, to be human is going, yes, if you are human, you will suffer. But the way that you're suffering, the things that you're suffering in, and the ways that you are assuming that you have to suffer are probably not what that is. Monogamy, assumed monogamy, we could call it toxic monogamy, has all sorts of rules and regulations and codes and subclauses that are mostly unspoken. In fact, almost entirely unspoken, that keep someone from being just a fucking human being. I don't know. I had a coffee with a coworker a few years back. And before we went to coffee, we were going to ride together because it was just simpler. And that individual had to call their partner to let them know that they were going to be in a car with another person of the opposite sex to go to get coffee, and just wanted to make sure it was okay. That is not liberation. That is not a way. At best, it is a lack of autonomy. And at worst, it is a controlling form of manipulation, kind of baked into the contract of the relationship. And it defends against something that's really, I think, kind of gross underneath there, which is an overwhelming amount of jealousy and fear, and probably a lot of attachment issues and trauma around losing people, and people leaving, that sort of thing. So, we talk about it in our in the collective, right? Oh, yeah, she's my better half. Oh, so you have a person in your life who carries your golden projection. When you say your better half, what I hear you say is that there is a significant part of you that is better that you don't have. You have actually contracted it out to someone else. Okay. Language matters. So when we say that, there's something we're saying. Someone might refer to a partner as their ball and chain, right? This is another way we might refer to someone that is holding back or keeping us locked down, either because they are actively doing that, but in more cases than not, it's a passive way that we lock ourselves down by referring to them as, well, I gotta get home to, and there's a Southern accent. I gotta get home to this person. And it's a way of avoiding evolution. It's a way of avoiding the life energy that's naturally trying to flow. Hi, Michael here. Hey, seriously, thank you for listening and engaging the Inner Work Community podcast. I trust today's episode gave you something to reflect on or illuminated a new trailhead to your hidden life. If this episode resonated with you, you can subscribe, share it with your people, and leave a review. That really helps spread the word and boost our online presence in this digital world. Remember, growth is not a straight line, and we're all figuring it out as we go. I'm grateful to be in this unfolding and excavating work with you. So, until next time, be yourself. You've got a good self. And remember, it's all a gift.